So thank you again for joining us this evening for our first Naturals 101 of 2022. It's even hard to say. And tonight we have Megan Desrosiers, our CEO and president of 100 Miles, and she will be sharing with you our legislative priorities for this year. So I'm going to hand it over to her. And again, thank you guys so much for being flexible with our technology issues. So here we go.
Thanks, Steph. So y'all know that, I don't know if you heard me say, but that we had a webinar planned for tonight. And then all of a sudden when we logged in at 6:45, there was no webinar option anymore. So this has happened to us a few times. So again, thank you for your flexibility. And Stephanie, thank you for your quick action on your feet to solve this problem. And I assume you'll be watching the waiting room and letting people in. Okay, cool. Okay, so my name is Megan Desrosiers. I am the president and CEO of 100 Miles, and I am so glad to see you all here tonight. I wanted to, we wanted to give you an opportunity to get, just a little bit of a legislative preview of what we expect to be coming down the pike this year. And I have a slideshow that I'm going to start. Can you all see those slides?
Yes.
Okay, good, good. Well, so, probably y'all know this, but just so that we're all on the same page, I'll give you a little bit of an introduction. Georgia's legislature meets every January through March, and they meet for 40 days. And our legislature moves really fast because we only have a 40-day time period. So when January starts, usually it's the second week of January, like it was this year. It's kind of like you just have to go into a full-on sprint. And I am the lobbyist for 100 Miles. That means that I register with the State Ethics Commission. I have to report my expenditures related to lobbying. I have to do that every other week, every 2 weeks, basically. And I do that throughout the legislative session. And then during the off months, I still have to continue to report, but that usually is monthly. So as you can imagine, over the last couple of years, COVID has thrown a big wrench into the legislative session. In a normal year, you show up at the lobby, you're one of probably 2,000 people in the building every day, and it's fast moving. And my usual hang around place is outside the men's room in the lobby, so that I can catch legislators. You're, constantly working to just kind of bump into them and walk with them down the hallway and talk to them about how things are going and what bills they anticipate coming up and things like that. So last year I did not get to do that because of COVID. This year I will do it, but on a limited basis. This year I think they're limiting, I heard today, we're still kind of trying to understand what the rules are going to be this year with COVID, but I heard today that they're limiting the numbers of groups that are allowed in the building, and you have to register with the building authority. Anyway, all of that is to say that I do think it'll be a little bit safer to go into the building this year, and I plan to go up for the first time January 25th. So I'll be there the 25th, 26th, 27th. So having said all that, because of COVID and because of the limitations, last year they didn't pass a lot of bills. And there weren't a lot of pieces of new legislation. But the other problem is that the pieces of legislation that did come up were a little sometimes problematic because of the lack of access and visibility that is just true on all levels, at the local all the way to the state and the federal level with COVID. Bad ideas get introduced pretty quickly. And so we have to stay on our feet. We have to be paying attention. And so given all of that, I will talk to you about, I think, 6 or 7 initiatives that we are watching, trying to advance, fighting, and preparing, laying the groundwork for into the upcoming years. The first, well, and I'll just say today was day 3 of the session. Tomorrow is day 4. They're out of session next week. They're doing budgeting next week. So day 5 will likely be Monday, whatever the Monday is after next Monday. I don't know the dates, probably the 24th, I think, or the 23rd of January. Okay, So I'm going to start with a good bill. We are working, as you know, 100 Miles is one of the organizations working to protect the Okefenokee Swamp from a mining proposal that was put forth a few years ago from a company named Twin Pines. So Twin Pines is a mining company. They are looking to mine minerals from the sand around the Okefenokee Swamp. And they have asked for a mining permit from the EPD. And they've, gone back and forth about the size of the mine. And right now they're on a 600-acre mine permit that would be kind of what they're calling a test plot, which it's not really a test plot. It's kind of their they scaled it back from 12,000 acres to 600 just to see what they could get through the EPD. The EPD is considering a permit, and what we know is that any legislation that affects mining around the Okefenokee Swamp will not impact this 600-acre mine that they hope to build, because they've already asked for the permit. So basically they say and it is true that they have a vested right. So that means that they've applied for the permit. And so any new law that gets passed won't impact this 600-acre mine, but it could impact the remaining 11,400 acres that they hope to mine on this same property. So we are at the same time that we're fighting the permit request at the EPD, we're also looking to the future of mining in the region. And we have heard that there are a few legislators who are interested in introducing a bill that would ban mining on Trail Ridge between the St. Mary's River and the Satilla River. So that area is generally highlighted here. You can see in the red right here that this is where the Twin Pines mine would be located. So that mine would be grandfathered in. They would be allowed to do that 600 acres. But on anything, on this parcel north of that area, it wouldn't be permitted into the future. What we would hope is that the mine, this elimination of the availability of the future mining would prevent them from also moving forward with the 600-acre mining permit, but because it just wouldn't be feasible to grow after they got the whatever the test plot approved. But we just don't know. This area is super important, obviously, to the hydrology of the Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge. You can see that it's adjacent to it. You may also know that it's vitally important for critical habitat for the gopher tortoise. But also it does have a presence of mining. So up here you can see these two mines, Mission North and Mission South. Those are operated by Comores. We're not trying to influence current mining operations. What we're trying to do is protect the area from mining into the future. So that bill has not been introduced yet. We are working with, we're looking to find a sponsor, and we're part of a coalition of groups who are talking to legislators about this. Some of the legislators that are potentially interested in this are Sheila McNeil, who is a senator here in coastal Georgia. We're also, I think Don Hogan is interested. I don't know if he would sponsor it. He said he would vote in support of it, but he's concerned about sponsoring it. And there are some other legislators as well. But all of that is kind of happening behind the scenes right now because, we just need somebody to sponsor it. When we do find a sponsor, we'll have a bill number, and we will be able to communicate with our members about the possibility of, sending emails or calling legislators and advocating for the forward movement of this bill. Okay, a bad bill that I want to talk to you about that is currently introduced. It was introduced last year. I should have mentioned that this is the second year in a 2-year session. So the 2-year session started last year, and last year the bill that was introduced is HB 746. It's introduced as, and I say this with I keep using air quotes because like the language is all part of kind of like the pitch, but it's introduced as the the Marshlands Restoration Act, the Coastal Marshlands Restoration Act. But when you read the language, it is all about protecting salt marsh and restoring salt marsh. But and that's what the preamble is. But then when you get into what the bill says, HB 746 essentially allows the expediting of privatization of salt marsh. So backing up, just to give you a little bit of historical background, in coastal Georgia, the King of England, when we were still a territory of England, granted king's grants to people who, were in his good favor. And these king's grants included acreage of marsh. So, we had the Revolutionary War, we've gone through history. Some people still have these king's grants in their possessions, but all of the rest of the marsh is owned by the state of Georgia. And if you don't have a king's grant to the marsh adjacent to your property, the state of Georgia owns it. And it is the burden of the people who have the king's grants to prove that they have the king's grants, for obvious reasons. The public ownership of the marsh is super important to people here in the state of Georgia. So if you have a king's grant, and you may have it, it's not as simple as just going to the state attorney general's office and saying, here, I have this king's grant, I own this marsh, please deed it to me. Rather, a lot of the king's grants have conditions in them that the families have, were supposed to have met, that they promised to the King of England when they received the king's grant. One example is that, we know that somebody has a king's grant that is not valid anymore because the King of England required the family to have one member of each generation serve in the military. It's kind of crazy because obviously it was a different country who was governing the United States at that time, and it was a different ruler and a different even type of government. But the terms of those grants need to be each evaluated on their own merit to make sure that the families who have them have upheld the conditions that they were supposed to uphold in order to have ownership of the marsh. So this bill says, and then sometimes it can take years for the Attorney General's office to verify that the family has done everything they were supposed to do. And sometimes sometimes it can't, but for the most part, it's a very complicated process, and it needs to be because it's super important. Often it's, if somebody can privatize a marsh, they can build a causeway over it, or they can, fill it, or they can do basically a lot of things that you can't do if the marsh is in public ownership. So this bill, HB 746, was introduced by Jesse Petrie. And there is the story is, and I don't know who the landowner is, but I'm just repeating this kind of secondhand from Jesse Petrie and William Ligon, is that there's a landowner in Chatham County who would like to have his king's grant recognized by the state. But he's frustrated because of the amount of time it takes for him and for the state to verify that his king's grant exists. So this bill was introduced, and it says that if the Attorney General doesn't respond to a landowner who claims ownership of the marsh through a king's grant, if the Attorney General doesn't respond in 60 days, then the king's grant is automatically verified, and the ownership of the marsh gets transferred to the owner who is claiming to have the king's grant. So we think this is a bad bill. We think that amount of time is necessary to protect the value of the marsh, to protect the virtue of the marsh, to protect the habitat and the public interest in the marsh. And we are working to fight this bill. I don't really see a way to make it better. I get it that landowners don't want to submit their information into a black box that doesn't have any definition or any delineation of time, but 60 days is too quick to expect the Attorney General to be able to do all the research and collect all the information related to the king's grants that people in Georgia still claim to have. So that's HB 746. And the legislative targets on this, in case you're interested in talking to people, are Jesse Petrie, Don Hogan, Stephen Sains, Buddy DeLoach, and Ron Stevens. And I honestly don't know if these guys know or understand exactly why this bill is bad. if you read the bill, the whole preamble is about the importance of the marsh to the people of Georgia and the importance of needing to restore it where the marsh has been damaged. Obviously, we agree with that, but when you read the fine details, it's problematic. Moving forward. So the one bill that I mentioned that hasn't been introduced is the Okefenokee. We're supporting that if it gets introduced. We're fighting the HB 746. There are a number of bills that we are interested in because we've been working on them for a while, because our partners have been working on them for a while, and because they're important to people in coastal Georgia. And I don't know if you saw in the Current, this is a screenshot from the Current earlier this week, but 100 Miles and our partners have been working on coal ash for many years, since I started working in the legislature 7 years ago. And the reason that we started working on coal ash is because Georgia Power has been over time closing their coal ash ponds. So the way that Georgia Power stores its coal ash, which is the ash that is, it travels by wind, it's contaminated ash that is the leftover byproduct of burning coal, is that they put it in wet ponds and they keep it there. That's what they've done. Well, over time, what the world and the United States have learned is that storing coal ash in wet ponds is not a good idea. The ponds can flood, the ponds leak, it leaks into groundwater, and it contaminates people's drinking water. It makes people sick. It pollutes the environment. It's just not a good idea. So Georgia Power committed to closing all of their ash ponds a few years ago, maybe 5 years ago. I don't know exactly how many. And what they said was that they were going to close the ponds using 3 different strategies. One, they were going to move the ash out of the ponds onto a site that they own that would be, where it would be stored in a lined landfill. That is our first preference when it comes to storing coal ash, because coal ash can leach into groundwater and it needs to be in a lined facility so that it doesn't travel away from, the contamination doesn't travel away from where it is stored. The other reason that we like that is because it stays within the liability of Georgia Power. The second option for them, and maybe you remember that in Wayne County, there was a proposal to move a lot of coal ash into the landfill there. So the second proposal is to move coal ash into municipal solid waste landfills around communities. A lot of these landfills are lined, but at the same time, it's taking up important space in municipal solid waste landfills that we need for our communities. So while it's good that these landfills are lined, it's not the preferred alternative. We would prefer that Georgia Power would keep it within their own property and that it wouldn't become the problem of the community, 1, in terms of storage, and 2, in terms of taking up space. But again, it's not the worst thing in the world because it would be in a lined facility. Our least favorite alternative is that Georgia Power drains the ponds and then just caps the coal ash in place. Because these ponds are unlined, it is a problem. And because the ponds were often put in wetlands because they were supposed to be wet ponds. So when they were originally locating the place where this coal ash would be stored, they put it in wetlands so that they wouldn't have to dig as deep or add as much water. So they were using naturally wet places to store this ash and create these ponds. But because they're in wetlands, it gives the opportunity for the coal ash to travel through the groundwater and move outside or off the site. So we don't like that option at all, because they would be capped in place. The underground streams or rivers where the old coal ash has been stored will continue moving through the coal ash and moving it around. So on that front, specifically, this week, EPA wrote a letter to the Georgia EPD telling them that the coal ash ponds that Georgia Power plans to drain and cap in place are problematic. And the letter specifically said that surface impoundments, which are these ash ponds, cannot be closed with coal ash, basically capped in place, in contact with water, with groundwater without a liner. So that third option, EPA is saying needs to be taken off the table, which is good news. And obviously there's going to be a lot of work that needs to be done, and we will be working on that along with our partners at the Georgia Water Coalition. But there are two bills currently before the legislature that were introduced last year that also have to do with coal ash. They are HB 176 and HB 647. Now, this is a picture of Plant McManus, which is in Brunswick. Plant McManus coal ash ponds flooded during one of the recent hurricanes, and the coal ash overflowed into the marsh, which again is problematic for obvious reasons. So HB 176 specifically deals with municipal solid waste landfills storing coal ash, which I said was our second preferred alternative. If a municipal solid waste landfill is to accept coal ash, they have to demonstrate, this bill would require them to demonstrate to the EPD that the landfills are lined and that they have leachate collection systems. So to protect the coal ash contamination and prevent it from moving off-site. HB 647 has to do with these impoundments that are unlined that Georgia Power plans to cap in place. And basically HB 647 says that impoundments closed in place must be monitored for no less than 50 years. And the monitoring must include, but is not limited to, the maintenance and integrity of the cover, the cap, over the coal ash, number one. Number two, the maintenance of a groundwater monitoring system and the monitoring of this system to detect contamination moving off-site. So these are two bills that we will be pushing forward. HB 176 was sponsored by a group of Democrats. HB 647 was initiated and sponsored by a group of Republicans. Both of these bills stalled in the House Natural Resources and Environmental Committee. And so the way to move these bills forward is to work with those members of that committee. And we, again, as we move forward through the session, we'll be sharing with our members ways to communicate with those people on those committees and those legislators. The next bill is one that obviously, as you probably all feel the same way I do, is near and dear to the hearts of people who live in coastal Georgia. And those bills have to do with plastic pollution. Now, as you know, we live in a state where it's really hard to get any kind of regulation about plastic passed at either the local level or the state level. But we all know the problems with plastic. And we all understand that a ban at the state level would be helpful. But probably what needs to happen first is local initiatives that would build up enough momentum for some action at the state level. But that doesn't prevent legislators from trying. So last year, two bills were introduced, Senate Bill 224 and Senate Bill 104. And Senate Bill 224 dealt with the Georgia Building Authority. And it would require that the Georgia Building Authority and all cafeterias within the Georgia Building Authority replace all single-use plastic carryout containers to paper by the end of, it said 2022. I mean, it said by 2022. I think at this point, the date would change. I don't know what the date would be. It might be 2023. And so that would have a limited, it would be helpful, but it would have a limited impact, as you can imagine, because the Georgia Building Authority has buildings in Atlanta. They're not near the coast, but it's something I think that we need to consider supporting. And we did support it last year. SB 104 is a limited plastic bag ban in retail stores. But it's a good, it's a good start, but it is a problematic bill in that it makes exemptions for where there are feasible alternatives, where there are not feasible alternatives yet. Like, for example, it makes an exception for bags for pet waste. We can imagine that. It makes exceptions for trash bags, for garments, for items sold in clothing stores, for bulk items, for plastic bags used for meat and for produce. Again, these are bills that we'll support. I'm not so sure they're going to go anywhere this year. They didn't go anywhere last year. I think like last year, this year, they're going to be pushing the most important, highest priority bills because we have a limited time and people are trying to limit the amount of time they're spending in the Capitol. But these are bills that, I think are good starts. And then the last issue I want to talk to you about, and this is kind of a big one, is thinking about the future. So COVID isn't going to last forever. And I feel like last year and this year, our decisions about legislation that we work on are, made very pragmatically based on the amount of time we have, the amount of time we can spend in the Capitol, the safety or lack thereof of spending time in the Capitol. And so there's not a lot of opportunity for pushing the envelope on legislation, which is why we've been kind of thinking about what would happen post-COVID, recognizing that there's not, we don't know what the world is going to look like post-COVID, but we do know that the United States government is looking at incentives for corporations to offset their carbon and to look into investing into carbon sequestration strategies. We also know that coastal Georgia has a lot of big corporations that are going to be watching the federal government and potentially taking advantage of these incentives. And then we also know that coastal Georgia has a huge amount of salt marsh, which, guess what, is a big opportunity for carbon sequestration. It is currently sequestering carbon. And as sea levels rise and the salt marsh floods more often, the salt marsh is going to need to migrate inland because obviously the water is going to be migrating inland. And so what we want to make sure is that funding from the corporations like Delta, like Southwire, like UPS, like Home Depot, these big companies that are going to be incentivized to invest in carbon offsetting opportunities, invest in coastal Georgia and other communities in rural Georgia to make sure that that money that they have stays in this state and helps promote and incentivize conservation. So we commissioned a study over the summer with the help of some of these corporations to look into what opportunities might need to be advanced through coalition building, through policy making, through relationship building, through academic kind of investigation into what the benefits could how they could be quantified for investing in salt marsh restoration programs. And that study, that researcher came up with 3 recommendations that could be implemented and that should be advocated for at the state level. And so right now, what I'm doing is working to build a coalition with entities like the Atlanta Metro Chamber of Commerce, like companies like Delta and Southwire and Home Depot, these big companies, because I know that if 100 Miles shows up at the Capitol and starts advocating for these legislative tools, that people are gonna be like, who the heck are you? Where's Delta? Why isn't Delta advocating for this? Or where's the Atlanta Metro Chamber of Commerce? So, before we get to the point where there's legislative language, I am working to lay the groundwork. And so those three legislative initiatives, 2 of them would be bills and 1 would be just working collaboratively with an existing state agency. But basically what we've figured out is that, first of all, Georgia has the only carbon registry in the Southeast. And so that means that the state of Georgia is already keeping track of investments made in carbon sequestration. Unfortunately, they're only doing it in terms of timber property. And that carbon registry is currently housed at the Georgia Forestry Association, which again is not a bad thing. It's a start. And so what we think we need to do is expand that registry to include things like the salt marsh, to include things like farmland, to include things like, breaking up pavement and making green stormwater infrastructure in communities, so that accountability and that accounting for carbon can be comprehensive rather than just, siloed into forest and salt marsh and, open space and whatever else. The second part of that, which is a separate legislative initiative, we think needs to be to create a carbon sequestration bank. And that bank, quote unquote, would be the entity where corporations could invest their money. And then on the other end of that, local communities and land trusts and other entities that have conservation projects or stormwater infrastructure projects, green stormwater infrastructure projects, could go to the bank and use the funding invested by corporations. So essentially, it's a kind of like a connector between the corporations who want to invest in Georgia and the communities that need the help with funding to help sequester carbon or sink carbon here in the state and work together. And then the intermediate step between these two things, obviously, because passing any new law is a lot of work, is to work with the Georgia Outdoor Stewardship Act board. Now, the Georgia Outdoor Stewardship Act is a piece of legislation that passed a few years ago, but it essentially results in about $20 million of funding to go towards land conservation every year. And the board members of that have to look at a scorecard, basically, that is a list of criteria that projects have to meet in order to receive funding. So the interim step here is to work with the board members to make carbon sequestration a consideration on that scorecard when they're considering allocating Georgia Outdoor Stewardship Acts to protect land. So, these are some things that we're working on into the future. What I hope is that we could, expand the carbon registry and create a carbon sequestration bank by 2024 or 2025. I mean, it's a lot of work. Again, it's kind of a new idea. So there's a lot of education and collaboration and coalition building that needs to happen. And 100 Miles is spearheading that for now. But like I said, we recognize that eventually we're just going to be a member of a big coalition. And it's fine for me to start the coalition and turn it over to someone with a more statewide interest in this issue, because obviously we're interested in the coast and we need this to pass at a statewide level. So having said all that, we're about 30 minutes into this presentation and I have gone through all of the legislative initiatives that we'll be working on this year. Again, there are bills that have been introduced, there are bills that we hope to have introduced, and then there are bills that we're looking at into the future. When we work on legislation, we always rely on our members to help us advocate. And if you are interested in continuing to move forward and help us with this, there are a few ways that we hope to make it easy for you to do that. First, you all are already signed up for our email updates. But with these email updates, we include action items, links that you can click on to take action when asked and communicate with your legislators. We will start sending those out pretty soon. And I encourage you to take action when you are encouraged to do so on our emails. The second option is to, if you see a bill here that you're interested in advocating for, you can always reach out to me, which my email address is here. And I can help you schedule a virtual meeting with any legislator you want. And I'd be happy to sit in with you on those meetings, or you can do it on your own, whatever you need, I can help you do that, or you can do it on your own. But I encourage you to communicate with your legislator if you feel comfortable face to face. You don't have to go to Atlanta. They're all pretty comfortable with Zoom at this point. But it really means a lot to them to hear from you. I'm a lobbyist. They know I get paid to do what I do, but they know that you're voters, and they know that if you communicate with them, you are doing that because you're interested in doing that, and because the issue, whatever you're talking to them about, is something that you really care about, and it might be something that could compel you to vote one way or another in election that they're involved in. So I'd be happy to help you establish those relationships, build set up those meetings. Like I said, be happy to sit in with you, or whatever you need to do, or whatever you need me to do. I'm there. And at this point, I'd love to answer questions. I'm going to show you the last slide, which are, some, ways that you can sign up for information updates about us. But what I thought I would do is stop sharing my screen and just let us talk to each other and answer questions and hear from you about what you think. Don't all say not at once. I can hear you. Also, I want to introduce Alex. I didn't see you. Alex Muir. Oh. She's on the Zoom. She does our Protect George. She does our, she does all the email alerts that help people connect to legislators. And she's been at the Capitol with me for a few years. She's now in law school, so she's only working for us on a contract basis, but she's here. And then we have Kate Reynolds, who is also on the call. She works with us, and Scott Coleman, who is on our board. So we've got a good 100 miles team here, along with all of you. So anyway, I encourage you to ask questions.
So I'll jump in because I've been out of it. I've been in law school. And I'm curious, Megan, how willing I know you talked about the Okefenokee bill, but from what you've experienced, how willing are the legislators to work on stuff with the community this year, given that it's the second year of a 2-year cycle, if I'm correct, if it's been kind of a blur, and then also with COVID. So what have you noticed?
Well, so I had a call this morning with Sheila McNeil's legislative aide, and essentially I don't know if you all know Sheila McNeil, but she's a little bit older, and she's not as technologically savvy as some of the other legislators are. But I mean, they are embracing the technology. They are like, whatever you want to send us. If you want to set up a Zoom call, let's do that. I mean, essentially, they understand that the building is, it's not closed, but it's not a lot of people want to go into that building right now. And they know that hearing from their constituents, the only way to do that is either over the phone or doing a Zoom call. And my experience is that they're more than willing to do that. But it's whether I think the real question is what is the realistic probability of any bills that aren't necessary, like the legislators don't think are like absolutely necessary, passing this year because of COVID? Are they going to try and rush through the session because of COVID? I didn't think they were until Omicron hit, and now I think that they're just trying to get it done and get out of there. But we'll see how that all plays out.
Okay. Well, that's better than what it could be. So that's good.
Come on, you guys have to have questions.
Well, Megan, I have one more question about the carbon sequestration bill that you're talking about for the future. Do you think the upcoming election is going to be able, for governor, are you hoping to utilize that to your or the group's advantage in getting that introduced or passed, or have you guys thought that far yet?
We are in the process of about that. I actually am, you may know the name Raphael Bostic. He's the president of the Atlanta Federal Reserve Bank. And he is also becoming the chairman of the board of the Atlanta Metro Chamber of Commerce. And so we have a meeting set up with him in our little working group because he has expressed interest in working on this initiative with us. So I think, with I think I'm answering your question, but it's hard to know, first of all, is the short answer. But the long answer is that the relationships that we're trying to build right now, hopefully will get us introduced and access to legislators that we wouldn't have otherwise, or be able to have a relationship with. And so we are trying to think ahead. But I don't think we'll really start pushing legislative language, maybe at the earliest next year, like at the end of this year, at the end of 2022, in preparation for 2023. I'm not sure that it's going to become an election issue, but it could. I don't know. It's just going to depend on how the election and the primary plays out.
Megan, when you talk about a coalition that you hope to have there with groups outside the coastal area, can you name a few? I'm in Atlanta, only part-time at the coast, and know lots of people in lots of groups, and just wondered what kind of groups are you talking about? Maybe you see might be involved.
Yeah, I think there are a handful of conservation groups that would be interested, like Nature Conservancy, like Georgia Conservancy, but more so I'm challenged and really trying to spend time with groups that are often our adversaries or groups that we don't work with, like business groups, like the Georgia Forestry Commission, like, not groups that we don't like or that they don't like us, but just we very rarely have an opportunity to work together, and therefore we don't have relationships. So those are some of the entities, like maybe the Farm Bureau is another entity. That one is one that we're often working against. So I'm trying to really be deliberate about trying to, figure out, how that old saying, like, we can agree to disagree, but when we agree to agree, let's work together. That's kind of the thing that I'm working on doing now. But it's been so long in some cases of disagreeing that there's not a lot of trust there. So that's what we're taking this time to try and build.
Megan, I have a question. With the King's Grant bill, is that something that you think that, do you know where DNR stands on that? And would they come out against that? I would imagine they might, because they're so protective of our, it's up to them to protect our marshes. So just wondering if they're possible partners with fighting that bill.
Yeah, well, so they haven't officially weighed in. They may be weighing in behind the scenes because the bill did not move last year. It's still in House Natural Resources Committee. I know that there have been some major concerns voiced by staff members at DNR, but I just don't know, like there's often a lockdown between what the staff can say to you behind the scenes and what their official legislative position is on a bill. They have not issued an official position on a bill, but the bill also has not had any formal hearings or public comments or anything like that. Now, it could be that, I don't know, but the DNR could be working with the chairman of the Natural Resources and Environment Committee and telling her to just sit on it and don't move it. I just don't know yet. But I know that, like, behind the scenes, I'm hearing that there's some concern, major concern.
Good, thank you.
Mhm.
When you said you think that some of those legislators who introduced the bill don't even really understand it, have you talked to any of them? Have
Yeah.
you talked to Jesse, and does he understand it, do you think?
Jesse understands it. Yeah. Jesse's the author, so he understands.
Right, that's what you said, but I mean, he's voted for things and then changed his mind, like the heritage a couple of years ago, he voted for the bill and then suddenly became the biggest opponent when all of his constituents jumped on him. So I just wondered if that's one that you think he could be flipped on, or is he?
I don't know if he could be flipped on. What I know about the history of this bill is that there is a landowner in Chatham County who would like to get his salt marsh, and I don't know what he wants to do with it. But he has been talking with Jesse, and he hired William Ligon to be his attorney. So William Ligon is not a senator anymore, but William is using his influence with legislators on the coast to advocate for his client. And again, I don't know what this person wants to do with that salt marsh, but I know that it is cause for concern. I'm pretty sure he doesn't want to restore it, in other words.
Right.
And so sometimes Jesse can change his mind, and in this case he may, because he reads the tea leaves and sees what his constituents think. But when there is one person who has a specific reason for asking for a bill, sometimes it's harder to change a legislator's mind when that person is a donor to the legislator and helps contribute to his campaign. But I will say that the other legislators, like Don Hogan, like Buddy DeLoach, like Stephen Sains, maybe even Ron Stevens, they don't know this guy. And so it might be easy to change their opinions about it. And obviously Lynn Smith, who's the chairman of the Natural Resource Committee, she doesn't know the person. So she has no dog in the fight. And she would be one who, if there was allowed outcry about it could, just kind of quash it and not move it forward out of that committee.
It just seems on the face of it, 60 days, you can't get anything done in 60.
Right.
I mean, that just seems like clearly, let's just get rid of the proof requirement. So that it seems to me like I'm surprised they would go that. I mean, I think they bargained for something, but 60 days, man, he must really have something he needs to do right away with that marsh.
Yeah, totally. And the other thing about it is that it's the Attorney General. So you submit your proof to the Attorney General's office. I mean, think about all the other things the Attorney General has to be paying attention to. So yeah, I think you're exactly right. Okay, iPhone 13 has a raised hand. I'm sorry, I don't know who that is, but you can ask her.
Hey, Megan, it's Karen North.
Oh, hey, Karen.
Hey. So what outside of 60 days, what would be reasonable? I don't know how fast these guys operate. What would be a reasonable amount of days or months?
I don't know. I think that, when you're going to be putting a legislative proposal about this together, the first thing you do is you learn more about the process and you ask the Attorney General's office, what are some of the impediments? What are some of the, things that you would like to have done faster? How much help do you need? What agencies do you need help from? You kind of have to understand the process before you arbitrarily say 60 days or 90 days or whatever. And so I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. I don't know enough about each, but what I do know is that each of these King's grants has its own unique set of circumstances associated with it. And so it's not like there's a formula that, I mean, it could be if you said a year, maybe that's right. But it's not like, maybe you do one in 30 days and maybe you do one in 2 years. I mean, they're just all different. So I don't know the answer to your question, but I have been asked that question before. And I think that answer has to come from the Attorney General's office or DNR or others who are used to looking at and evaluating these conditions and these King's grants to help us understand how the process could be made better. But essentially what we have now is basically a unilateral proposal coming from a landowner and, going to the legislature without input from any of the agencies used to dealing with this.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, well, Stephanie, I guess if there aren't any more questions, I don't know if you have a closing spiel. I know that I gave you my email address earlier, and I'll share that with you again. But it is actually here, megan@100miles.org on the bottom of the screen. I encourage you to reach out at any time. We'll be sending a few updates during the legislative session. They're not going to be weekly, but there might be 2 or 3 throughout the legislative session. Please, I can't do my work without you and without you participating in the legislative process. So feel free to reach out to me at any point in time. And, if you ever want to go to Atlanta with me, actually, I have one of our members in Atlanta lobbying with me on January 26th. So, if you want to do that, if that's something that interests you, just let me know. I mean, let's stay in touch because I think that's what helps me do my work better. And I think it helps you stay connected and it helps the legislators do their jobs too.
Well, thank you so much for everyone for joining us this evening. We really appreciate your support for 100 Miles because again, we can't do the work we're doing up at the Capitol without your support and your donations. So thank you so much. And Megan has on the screen, if you do want to donate and find out information, you'll have all that. I will also be sending a follow-up email once this video gets edited and put onto our YouTube with a link to it. I will include Megan's email in there as well and any other initiatives that have come up before, in the next couple of days. But we do want to thank you all for taking your time out and being flexible with our technology issues this evening. And we wish you all a wonderful evening and thank you so much for joining us this evening.